I just watched Chainsaw Man and it was pretty good. So I decided that I would make a what if about it. So, you know, here we are with what if Deku was, well, Chainsaw Man. If you guys want to enjoy the video, obviously leave a like, subscribe, you know, all that good stuff, and turn on the notification bell if you guys enjoy this video so you guys will be notified for when part 2 drops. That said, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Alright, so for this what if to work, we have to first establish a couple of things. Number 1, Inko can't be part of the story because if Inko's there, then Deku doesn't get a tragic backstory. I mean, at least not that much of a tragic backstory. So we're going to be saying that when Deku was born, he was pretty much too much for Inko to handle, and she ended up passing away giving birth to Deku. So Hisashi ended up going down, spiraling downhill, and he basically ended up being in a bad place in life, and that pretty much led him to getting a gambling addiction. With his gambling addiction, he ended up getting into it with a couple of sharks that were pretty much there trying to get the money back from him every single week, and he was struggling. He was struggling a whole lot to get the money together and pay for the apartment that they were living in that was very, very crappy. It had like roaches and they barely ever ate. Izuku was always malnourished. It was as if his dad didn't care about him. His dad always seemed to be well fed, but Izuku, he was almost a second choice to his father. And it shocked him, but at some point he has to just understand that these were the cards that he was dealt. So basically what ends up happening is essentially one day Hisashi just can't handle it no more. The sharks pretty much told him that if he doesn't pay them back in a month, they're gonna kill him. So Hisashi decides that he's not gonna let somebody else decide when he goes, and that he's about to go out like a G. So what does Hisashi do? He goes to his room, he grabs this thing that looks like a little water gun, right? He holds it up to his head and BAM! He just blows his brains out, right? Hisashi kills himself, commits seppuku, and what ends up happening is the police show up, right? The police show up, they get a report. Izuku is pretty much sitting in there just like, my dad's dead, my mom's dead, everybody's dead. Isn't that great, right? He's just thinking that to himself, just like, oh, what do I do now? And right next to him, one of the loan sharks appears and he's like, hey kid, so I have some bad news for you. Your dad, he owed us a lot of money, kid, and since you're his son, you're gonna have to be picking up that debt. So good luck, kid. You have about a month. If you don't give us the money, we're gonna kill you. And from there, Izuku pretty much started having to gather money as much as he possibly could, pay back the sharks, and he ends up having to essentially give away his eye and sell it in the black market, give away one of his kidneys, pretty much start doing everything and anything that he really can to essentially like get through and like not have to owe these people money. There is no devils in this universe, so I'm just going to be saying that instead of hunting devils, Izuku basically just hunted people with very unstable quirks, and they were brought to be slaves to like really, really rich people in the hierarchy of the MHA world, right? Kind of like slaves. Now, he pretty much does this for half of his life, and one day he's like 16 years old. No, he's like 15. Let's go 15, right? He's 15 years old. He's lived this entire life up to this point pretty much being poor, not having any jam for his bread, right? And what ends up pretty much happening, I think, would be we finally end up getting one day where Izuku is just chilling with his favorite pet, Poached or something like that, or Pooch. I don't even know. I forgot the name of the thing. It's only been 3 episodes. Don't judge me. But basically, he has like this small little quirk that he's always had since he's been a little kid. And the quirk was essentially having this pet. It had like a little chainsaw at the top of his head, and Izuku just had this like little cute pet with him, and that was what Izuku always thought his quirk was. Obviously his little pet thing could actually make the chainsaw work, and that's what he would use to actually take out all of these high advanced quirk users. And so that's how pretty much Izuku would go around and make his money. That's what he would have to do, you know. Those were just the cards he was given. So obviously he and his little dog thing are, having one of those good old days, right? And basically what ends up happening is Deku would go to meet one of the sharks one day, right? He's meeting him, and the shark would pretty much tell him that he's sorry, that it's, no hard feelings, kid, but he really needs to get this deal. And pretty much what ends up happening is Deku just looks up, and there's just this squad of like dudes with powerful quirks, right? That's like, let's say that it's like a bootleg version of the League of Villains, right? Bootleg version of the League of Villains. They look at Deku and they're like, hey kid, I heard you actually killed my cousin Ricky. So we're gonna have to teach you a lesson, bud. And Deku, being a kid, he's like, you betrayed me, right? Like he's like, I only had to pay off 300,000 yen, like that was it, and I was finally gonna be free. But the guy just looks at him and says, it's just business, kid. It was either me or you, and I chose wisely. It had to be done, kid. And sorry guys for my notifications being on. Let me turn them off real quick. But yeah, he basically tells him that it was either him or him. And Izuku looks at him like saddened, like he's like pretty upset because he was so close, but he knows that he's gonna pretty much die. So Izuku begins to pretty much run out towards the building, but they end up pretty much cornering him. They beat him to a pulp, and they pretty much end up cutting into him with knives because they have like little cutting quirks, right? And then they throw his body in the trash can, right? That happens, and his little quirk pet animal thing just fuses in with him. Obviously in the anime Chainsaw Man it's a devil, but we're just gonna say that it is a devil, but it's like Deku's quirk, okay? And Poach, or whatever the dog's little name thing is, pretty much like just looking at him, and like he's talking to him telepathically, right? He's telling him that he was always happy being by his side, and that he's glad that he could sacrifice his life for his sake, that he'll be with him still, and that he just wants to see Deku accomplish his dream that he once had as a little kid of being a hero. You know what I mean? And yeah, Deku is just listening to these words from his little pet Pochita, Pochita? I don't know, but basically Pochita, right? Or something like that. And he is just like, no, don't leave. And then he opens his eyes, and all of his injuries are gone, and now he has like this cord on his chest, right? And Deku looks around, and he gets out of the trash can, and he pretty much sees all the dudes still there, and he pulls on the cord, and he rushes towards the direction of all of them, and he pretty much just begins to slice and just cut into these dudes. Like, he doesn't kill them, but he like cuts one of the dude's arms, he cuts the leg off of one of the other ones, and he just rushes in, and he does actually end up absolutely killing the shark that like pretty much betrayed him, for sure, because he was angry at him. And as this is all happening, the pro heroes would pretty much jump in, and they get in the way of Deku when, while he's doing what he's doing with his quirk. Aizawa uses his quirk erasure, and Izuku just falls to the floor. He's like a little kid, and Aizawa's like, he's a kid, right? And they like take him to the station, and they'll like pretty much end up asking him like what he was doing there and why he like rampaged like that. Deku would say that his quirk just went crazy, and that those guys set him up. They were trying to kill him, and that, he was pretty much about to die if it wasn't for them saving him. And Aizawa looks at him and says, kid, it looks like they were the ones that were about to die had we not stepped in. And Deku just looks at them and says, those guys set me up. That guy over there, he was a loan shark. And then he pretty much just starts explaining the backstory of how he got to that point. And Aizawa just like, he had this look of disgust. Like, he just had this look of, how could anybody do this to another human being? Like, how can you be this cruel? But that's besides the point, because that's not even like the main concern. That's not even like the main thing that they should be even caring about right now, right? So Aizawa then like looks at him, and he's like, so how much money did you owe? And Deku just looks at him, and he goes, 300 million euro. And Aizawa is just shocked. He's like, wow, kid, like you owed that much money? And Deku's like, yeah. And Aizawa is just like, look, how about I pay off your debt, and in exchange you start doing something for me, right? Now Deku looks at Aizawa, and he's like, what do you mean? And Aizawa's like, I saw your quirk. Seems a bit dangerous, but with just the right training, I think you could potentially become a great hero. That like he saw Deku like wiling out, and his strength and his speed, it was just incredible to him, right? and he tells him that they would much rather have Deku as a hero rather than as a villain running through the streets loose, right? And Deku looks at Aizawa and he's like, you know, that's actually the nicest thing that anybody has ever done for me, said to me, or anything. Like I literally have never had anybody be this like cool to me. And they bring him breakfast in bed, and Deku's just like, he starts literally tearing up, like breaking down in tears, because like this is like the only time that anybody's ever like shown him any sign of like kindness whatsoever. And Izuku is just eating it up. Like he's loving this, and he pretty much just accepts Aizawa's offer immediately, not even thinking about it twice, because it's either he accepts this or he pretty much just becomes a villain, right? And gets thrown in Tartarus, and he gets the villain treatment, and he's just going to be framed as that for the rest of his life. So he would much rather work with Aizawa and figure things out. Around this time would be the 10-month training period. So I'm just going to be saying that during this time that Deku just agreed to Aizawa, he would have approximately 10 months to essentially work on his quirk and figure out all the details about how to take the chainsaws away from his hands and how to retract them and, you know, all that crazy stuff, right? So he ends up pretty much figuring out that he can use a chainsaw in both hands, or he can like take it away and like punch and like just be normal human hand, right? But the helmet and like the head chainsaw, it just stays there. It just doesn't go away. Why? Because it just looks awesome. I'm not going to take away like the cool factor of Deku's costume. So we're going to be keeping that chainsaw regardless. And even though we don't really know the full extent of Denji's power in the chainsaw thing, I have read up to like chapter 30 of the manga, so I know that Denji does get very, very powerful. And I'm currently just waiting on the next episode of the anime just to see if she keeps her promise. Wink, wink. But anyways, what ends up happening is basically we get this really strange scene. By the way, guys, if you guys aren't watching like or if you guys aren't keeping up with the manga, just know that like something very, very strange is going to be happening between Denji and one of the characters that's going to get introduced. Like seriously, it is so gross, but you know, you guys are going to have to go through it. It'll probably come out in like episode 8 or 9 or something like that. But regardless of that little fact, what basically we're going to be covering now is just how Deku has progressed, right? Deku, obviously, since he has a quirk that's very, very dangerous and could kill people easily because of the fact that, you know, if he rushes at someone and just chainsaws them, they're going to die, bro. Like he can rip someone's arm off. So they basically made it so that Deku has like this like he can only use one chainsaw in one hand, and the other hand he's gonna have like a hammer, right? They give him like a hammer hand that he's gonna have, and he's gonna have like a chainsaw and a hammer hand. And basically what's gonna happen is he's gonna mostly fight with his hammer hand, and the chainsaw's just gonna be like in case they hold him in a lock or just to keep his enemies away, right? And that's just gonna be the fighting style that he ends up developing, just because I mean he can't really have the murderous fighting style, just because in MHA killing is not exactly the normal, like you can't just kill villains, even though it would be dope if he did, but you still just can't kill villains. So basically what ends up happening is eventually the 10 months would end and the entrance exam would happen. But because Deku's with Aizawa, Aizawa would recommend him to the recommendations exam, and that's essentially how Izuku would get in. And the reason that I'm not really going to be covering this too much in depth is just because we don't really know too much about the recommendations exams or how they really worked in the anime. So I can't really feel like I can cover those exams perfectly. So I'm just going to kind of skip to that, but it's pretty much just alluded that they had a race, that they had to save a couple of people, and that they definitely had like a little written portion, which is just kind of what they end up having to do. Eventually though, Deku would get his acceptance letter to UA, and Nezu would have a bit of a, you know, like second thoughts about this kid with this strange quirk. But at the end of the day, you know, it's just a normal kid. He has a couple of chainsaws on his arm and head and both hands, but it's like nothing a little training and, you know, hero core stuff can't beat out of him, right? And Deku, he pretty much now finally lives in a nice house. You know, he has a pool in his backyard because Aizawa's like rich, and he lives in like a kind of lavish house, but it's like low key and it's like in an area that's pretty far, so no one could bother him. And Aizawa is just chilling, right? Like Aizawa has a pretty good life. He earned it, and he's not like usually the type of guy to like flex, but he does have a couple of things in his house that he likes, like pool tables and stuff like that. And so Deku would kind of begin getting accustomed to this, but every day, dude, like he pretty much wakes up and just is like so thankful to Aizawa. Like he literally tells him thank you probably like 10 times a day. And it's to the point where Aizawa has gotten so sick of Deku because he just like he thanks him all day. Like he'll be drinking a cup of water and Deku will be like, I just gotta say like thank you. And it's like Aizawa's just getting so tired of hearing it. But you know, he knows that it's not coming from a bad place. Like Deku genuinely is so thankful to him. So he's like trying his best not to like scream at Deku and be like, dude, I get it. You know what I mean? But regardless of that said fact, the first day of UA would come around and Deku would be there in class like 3 hours before, just sitting there like tapping his fingers, you know, like on the desk. And eventually people would begin walking into the classroom. I personally think Ida, being the smarty boy that he is, would be one of the first people in there. So when he sees Deku, he's like, oh, wow, you're here early as well? Deku's like, yeah, I've been here for about 2 hours. And Ida's like, oh, wow, somebody's even more dedicated than I am. Name's Tenya Ida, right? He begins to introduce himself and he begins hyping himself up, right? And Deku's just talking to him for a little bit. He introduces himself, but then he just tells Ida that it's probably best if they just stay quiet because the teacher, you know, they don't want the teacher to think bad of them, right? Off rip. And Ida is just like, oh, right. So he sits down in his seat and eventually Bakugo comes in and, you know, they start arguing. They start getting into it a little bit. And Deku is just in the back, like pretty much laying his head down, just trying to sleep until eventually Aizawa gets up after everybody gets there. And he's like, all right, my name's Aizawa. I'm going to be your homeroom teacher. Everybody shut up. Immediately, all of them look at him and Bakugo's like, who's this guy? Aizawa looks at him and he's like, I'm going to be your homeroom teacher. Name's Aizawa. Put these on and meet me outside. Bakugo grins and Deku immediately gets up out of his chair, grabs the thing and immediately does what Aizawa tells him without any questions or anything. He just follows anything Aizawa tells him. He does exactly what Aizawa orders him to do, right? And Deku just meets everybody else outside and Aizawa looks to the direction of Bakugo and he's like, here, kid, throw this as far as you can. Bakugo goes ahead and does that, and everybody watches as the ball just goes crazy, and immediately Aizawa begins to bring up the threat of like, you guys have to like get high scores or you're gonna get expelled. And because Deku has like very, very high superhuman level strength, speed, and all that stuff, he's able to breeze through the exam without actually being towards the bottom. And there was really no portion of the exam that really had him have to use his quirk. So I'm just gonna be saying that Deku doesn't really show all of his cards quite yet, but all the class kind of ended up getting the memo that Bakugo and Todoroki were kind of the strongest. Ida is pretty much up there. Tokiyami, he has a pretty cool quirk. Satoki, you know, they started getting to know each other's quirks and stuff like that. And we end up getting this really cool moment where Deku just kind of, after everything is all said and done, he just bumps into Uraraka and he's like, hey. And Uraraka's like, hey, sorry about that. You know, they start getting a little conversation going. And Deku's like, so what do you think about the school so far? And Uraraka's like, oh, I think it's great. And then Aizawa looks at him and says, hey, stop flirting over there, you two. And Uraraka and Deku, you know, they both get red in the face. And he's like, I wasn't. And Aizawa's like, shut it, kid. Deku immediately stays quiet. And Aizawa then from there just finishes everything. And, you know, when class is over, Deku goes, why'd you call me out like that? And Aizawa's like, I had to get you back for all those times that you told me thank you. It's been about 1 million times, kid. I think it's about time that I understood that you're very grateful. So it's just a little bit of a lesson. The next time that you tell me thank you, the next time I'll embarrass you. And Deku looks at Aizawa and he's like, that's so mean. But Aizawa looks at him and he's like, it is what it is, kid. But from there, he pretty much goes on to look at Deku and tell him that, you know, he is proud of how far he's come. And that he better be on his A game for the next couple of days because this hero training stuff isn't gonna be easy. This isn't just gonna be handed to him just because he's living with Aizawa, and also tells him not to tell anybody that he's living with Aizawa. But Deku nods, you know, he understands where Aizawa's coming from, and he tells him that he'll do his absolute best to stay out of trouble and to make Aizawa proud. Aizawa looks at Deku and he's like, I know you will, kid. But for now, just get some sleep. Deku goes to his room and he grabs his phone. He begins scrolling through TikTok. He realizes that it's like 4 a.m. and that the next day of school is right around the corner, and he's just like, crap. And I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys have also been there before, like that moment where you realize that you were up all night and you're gonna get no sleep whatsoever. Like I've literally been on TikTok this whole time that I've been recording this video, just scrolling. Like I have not been able to stop, bro. It's bad. But regardless of that fact, I think that the next day Deku just kind of wakes up and he has like the biggest bags under his eyes, right? But he goes to school nonetheless. And once he arrives, he pretty much ends up passing out during his first couple of 3 periods. And he finally wakes up around lunchtime and, he's just ready for All Might to come in and just begin teaching him everything, because as much as he doesn't have a lot of memories, he does remember the excitement he felt as a little kid when he would watch All Might on the television, that crappy one that they had that was like black and white. And Deku just feels so excited when he sees All Might walk in the room, and All Might walks in obviously with his cliche smile, just being like, I am here.